Now, have you ever walked into a room and wondered whether you truly belong there? Perhaps someone else seemed to know the unwritten rules. They understood the language. They knew the people. They shared experiences that you didn't share. And you were physically present, but somehow still standing on the outside. Now, turn that question around. Has someone ever entered a room you were leading and felt exactly the same way? Now, that question takes workplace diversity and beyond policies and programs, statistics, and organizational statements. It makes it personal because behind every discussion about diversity is a human being asking something very simple. Will you see me? Will you hear me? Will you treat me fairly? And will I have an opportunity to contribute? Welcome to the Listening Heart, folks. I'm Richard Fontenay, and in this series we explore spiritual leadership, a leadership that begins within and then moves outward into the way we serve people in business, at work, and throughout life. Now, my own leadership journey has spanned different worlds, years of formation with Benedictine monks and theological study, executive experience in the public sector, decades of consulting, training, and working with leaders, and more recently, the changing world of digital entrepreneurship. Now, those experiences have taught me something important. Leadership ultimately comes down to how we seek and treat people. And this week, across our e-learning platform, our focus is on workplace diversity. Now, it's in two parts. The first part outlines the context and provides background for part two, the application. And this gives you greater flexibility. You can jump right into the application without listening to the context, and vice versa. However, you may find it helpful to listen to both videos. Now, let's move on. In our leadership companion, the return on investment of inclusion, why workplace diversity is a leadership advantage, we explored a central idea. Diversity brings different people to the table. Inclusion helps their contribution reach the table. And leadership determines what happens next. And here in the Listening Heart, I want to go beneath the organizational conversation. I want to explore the spiritual foundation. And for that, we turn to three ancient but remarkably relevant words: justice, mercy, and humility. Diversity, equity, and inclusion may sound like contemporary organizational language. The underlying human questions, though, are ancient. How should we treat one another? What does fairness require? How do we respond to people who are different from us? And what responsibility do those with authority have toward people whose voices are less powerful? And what happens when our assumptions prevent us from truly seeing another person? Scripture repeatedly confronts those questions. One of the clearest expressions comes from the prophet Micah. Now, Micah asks what God requires of us, and the response can be summarized in three actions: act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Now, there is an entire philosophy of spiritual leadership contained within those three actions. Justice influences how we act. Mercy influences how we relate and humility influences how we see ourselves. Together, they provide a powerful framework for approaching difference. So let's look at each one. First, justice. Now, justice can be boiled down to fairness requires more than good intentions. Justice asks us to look beyond our intentions and consider what people actually experience. Most leaders don't wake up in the morning thinking, how can I exclude someone today? Exclusion is often much subtler than that. For instance, it can happen through assumptions, our habits, unwritten rules, processes nobody has examined for years, or simply through failing to notice whose voice is missing. Imagine a leadership team filling an important position, and someone says, we need somebody who fits our culture. Now that sounds reasonable. Every organization needs people who can work effectively in line with its values and purpose. But what does fits our culture actually mean? Does it mean someone who shares our values? Or does it quietly mean someone who thinks like us, communicates like us, has a similar background like us, and makes us comfortable? And justice asks us to examine the difference. It doesn't require us to abandon standards. It requires us to examine whether our standards are genuinely connected to performance and purpose, or whether some are simply inherited preferences. Now, that's an uncomfortable question. But spiritual leadership isn't always comfortable leadership. Sometimes it asks us to look carefully at things we would rather assume are just fine. Now, let's consider mercy as a way of seeing the human story. Justice asks, what is fair? But mercy asks another question. What is this person carrying that I may not understand? Now, that doesn't mean lowering expectations. It means adding compassion to expectations. Consider a new employee joining your organization. Perhaps English isn't their first language. During meetings, they take a little longer before contributing. A manager could interpret that silence as uncertainty or a lack of knowledge. But perhaps something completely different is happening. Maybe the employee is listening carefully. Maybe they are translating ideas internally before speaking. And maybe they come from a culture where interrupting a senior leader would be considered disrespectful. And maybe they have an excellent insight, but the pace of the conversation never gives them an opening. Mercy creates curiosity. Instead of immediately judging behavior, we ask, what might I not understand? And that single question can change a relationship. And it works beyond cultural diversity. Think about how generations relate to organizations. A younger employee may approach work differently than someone who has been in the organization for 30 years. The experienced employee may think they don't have the commitment we had. And the younger employee may think they're unwilling to change. Both may be wrong, but both may be partly right. Neither will discover very much, though, if they begin with judgment. Mercy creates enough space for a conversation to happen. Now, let's go on to humility as a way of expressing my experience is not everyone's experience. Perhaps for us, humility is the hardest word. Humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means recognizing that you don't see everything. Your experience is real. Your knowledge matters. Your perspective, though, may be well informed, but it is still your perspective. Now, there's a wonderful leadership discipline hidden in those words. The hidden meaning could be, I may be missing something. Imagine the difference those 5 words can make. I may be missing something, especially when disagreement begins. Instead of immediately defending your position, you think, I may be missing something. Someone describes an experience you've never had, and you think, I may be missing something. A younger colleague questions a long-established practice, and you think, I may be missing something. And then a customer responds differently than your marketing team expected, and you think, I may be missing something. You know, humility doesn't require agreement. It requires openness, and that openness is essential for diversity to become useful. Because if I already believe my perspective is the only reasonable one, then having different people around me changes very little. I may have diversity in the room, but I don't have diversity in the conversation. When we look at the ministry of Jesus, something striking appears again and again. Jesus noticed people others overlooked. He crossed boundaries others maintained. And he spoke with people others avoided. And he listened to people whose social standing gave them little influence. Consider the Samaritan woman at the well. The encounter crosses cultural, religious, social, and gender boundaries. Yet, Jesus does not begin by treating her as a category. He engages her as a person. Or think about Zacchaeus. The crowd sees a tax collector. Jesus sees a man. Again and again, the pattern appears. Where others see a label, Jesus sees a person. Where others see someone's history, Jesus sees possibilities. And where others create distance, Jesus creates encounter. Now that gives us an important spiritual leadership principle. Never allow the category to become more important than the person. Diversity conversations can sometimes unintentionally do precisely that. We begin speaking about groups and forget the groups are composed of individuals. And every individual carries a story, a history, strengths, wounds, hopes, skills, fears, ideas, and potential within themselves. Spiritual leader invites us to see the person and not assume the understanding of a category. So what does justice, mercy, and humility look like in the places where we actually live? For instance, in business, work, and life. In business, justice asks whether opportunity is genuinely available. Mercy asks whether we understand the different circumstances of the people we serve. And humility asks whether our customers, employees, or partners may see something we don't. A business that listens broadly can learn broadly. And at work, justice asks whether people have a fair opportunity to contribute. Mercy asks whether we understand before judging. And humility gives us permission to say, "Tell me more. Tell me more." Now, those three words can become a powerful leadership tool. In life, the same principles reach beyond organizations. Our families contain differences. Our neighborhoods contain differences. Our communities contain differences. Even people who appear similar can carry remarkably different experiences. The question becomes, can I remain curious enough to encounter the person rather than simply confirm what I already believe? That is spiritual leadership practiced in everyday life. Now let's go back to the three acts of the listening heart, and perhaps we can carry them into part 2, the application. When you encounter difference, remember the 3 movements. Justice asks, is this fair? The mercy asks, what might this person be experiencing? And humility asks, what might I be missing? Now, these 3 movements can transform a leadership conversation. They can transform a meeting. And they can transform a workplace relationship. And sometimes they can transform us. Because the deepest work of inclusion doesn't always begin by changing someone else. And sometimes it begins by allowing our own assumptions to be changed. Now, before we move toward application, let's take a quiet moment. Think of someone in your workplace, business, community, or classroom, or life whose experience is quite different from yours. And don't try to solve everything. Don't analyze them. Simply ask yourself, what might this person see that I don't see? And then ask yourself another question. When was the last time I truly listened to them? Now hold those questions for a moment, because listening is not merely waiting for another person to finish speaking. Listening is making enough interior room for another person's experience to reach us. And sometimes that is where inclusion begins. Now, let's break for our coffee. And before we do, here's a thought I'd like to carry with you as you move to your coffee. Justice changes how we act. Mercy changes how we relate. And humility changes how we listen. And together, they change how we lead. Now, during your break, think about one conversation you had recently with someone whose experience, background, generation, and perspective or way of thinking differs from your own. Ask yourself 3 questions. Was I concerned about what was being fair? Did I try to understand what that person was experiencing? And was I humble enough to consider that I might be missing something? And remember, this is not about guilt or a scorecard. It's just about reflection. Because spiritual leadership grows through awareness before it grows through action. Now, in part 2, the application, will take these 3 principles, justice, mercy, and humility, and put them to work. We'll explore a practical justice, mercy, humility leadership practice, which you can use in conversations, meetings, decisions, and relationships. We'll move from seeing difference to leading through difference. Now, enjoy your coffee, and when you come back, we'll continue the journey together.